Welcome to another episode of the Untangling Web3 podcast. And I think we need to start by saying Merry Christmas. This episode is going out on the 25th of December.
Yep.
So Merry Christmas to you all. And what is a better present than listening to me and Jack speak about some of our highlights from the year?
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Alec. Merry Christmas to everyone listening at home. It's just reminding me of last year, our Christmas episode, where I just could not. I mean, we had drinks at the time, right? You remember this? We had drinks, and we would. We had to be fair. We hadn't drunk them at this point, and I just couldn't coordinate myself to say Merry Christmas, have a sip, and then smile. I just couldn't do it.
I still don't think you can, and we're not going to test it out now. I don't think we have the time, but today we're going to be talking about some of our favorite moments from the year. And it's the first full year we've actually had, the second Christmas, but the first full year. So we have 52 episodes of content to choose from. We've had some incredible guests. We've done some incredibly tricky topics as well. But there's lots of things to choose from. And I think I am quite excited just to go through some of the best moments from you as well.
Yeah, me too. I'm super excited. We've had such a great year. We've had some awesome guests on, and we're going to highlight some of the best ones today. Before we start, though, we should definitely just have a quick shout out to Vorbos for making this possible, right? We're in the studio, we're IRL, just for folks at home, this is not the first time me and Alec have been in a room together, but it is the first time we record the podcast in the same room together. So yeah, this is super exciting, and thanks to Vorbos for making it happen.
And I think it's the perfect time to do this because we're reflecting on the year and we're kind of looking at how the episodes, the quality, the topics have kind of, well, I would say improved over the course of the year. And this is the cherry on top to now be in person, recording in a podcast suite. We're going to do this more regularly, hopefully have more events in person, potentially in the future as well. But yeah, it's an extremely exciting way to end the year. And now, should we dive into some of our favorite moments from the year?
Yeah, let's get into it.
We've had so many incredible guests, so many incredible episodes covered and topics covered, and also so many incredible events across the year. To look back a year ago when we were kind of in crypto winter style, lots of things AI was just picking up, to where we are now, it is a monumental shift in both technology, politics, everything has changed substantially. And I think it's an incredible time to be, a technology podcast talking about these things. But yeah, should we kick it off?
Yeah, why not? I have picked, so we both picked 3 of our favorite guest clips of the year. And we've also, as tradition, picked a clip of each other, which, we're not entirely sure of each other's clips. So that'll be fun to work out. But yeah, let's start with our favorite guest. So for my first one, I have gone for a clip of Jeff Garzik. So this is from episode 72, Unifying Bitcoin and Ethereum. And Jeff is, if you don't know him, then you should know him. He is a proper OG of the Bitcoin world, right? He was one of the very earliest developers of Bitcoin post Satoshi and Gavin Andresen. So he has been in the world of Bitcoin for so long. And this clip is really interesting because he's talking about the issue and the concept of scalability, how we get enough transactions on Bitcoin and other blockchains. And I think it's super interesting that we actually got to hear this from someone who's been there from the start. So yeah, let's take a look at this one.
The way blockchain networks work today is the network fees increase. It's called congestion pricing. And some of us might literally have congestion pricing on our highways today. Blockchains have congestion pricing as well. And it's fundamentally an auction for block space, which is finite and limited resource. And when the road is busy, when the blockchain is busy, those fees go up. And when the road is not busy, when the blockchain is not busy, those fees go down. But fundamentally, you can't put all the cars in the world on one road. You can't put all the coffees on a single blockchain, no matter how much Starbucks would love to blockchain. That would lead to a suboptimal user experience. But again, the root of the crypto tree, Bitcoin, incredibly secure. Ethereum, the queen of crypto, Grand Central Station for digital assets. The way this all comes together is that you build a road connecting the two. These are called layer 2 blockchains, or L2. And your additional road, and I'll bring in another analogy, like the champagne waterfall that you see at hotels and wedding receptions. The blockchain at the top is that layer 1 blockchain, and traffic spills over into that next layer of champagne glasses, that next layer of secondary blockchains.
Yeah.
And as that traffic increases, those secondary blockchains can handle more of that load. And fundamentally, it's all again connected back to Bitcoin and Ethereum, the king and queen of crypto.
Yeah. So Jeff was a great guest. Obviously, like you say, one of the people at the core of early Bitcoin development. He knows this space like no one else does effectively. It was an absolute privilege to have him on the podcast. And he's talking there at a very high level about layer twos and about, say, some of the kind of the key characteristics of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and trying to marry them in his current project, which is around with Hemi Labs. And yeah, he does it really well, right? He makes it fairly understandable, because these are really complex and tricky things to get your head around. And it would take us a week to probably kind of jump into the actual technical detail. But yeah, that's a great clip. I'm glad you chose that one.
Yeah, that is partly why I chose it, right? Is because he is like a very technical guy. Like he's a proper kind of open source dev background, but to be able to have that kind of skill set and then still explain things like that in such a clear and concise way, and using that analogy of the kind of the highways that connects everything together is super interesting. And yeah, again, we had to mention Jeff, I think, because he was such a great guest. So yeah, that's my first pick. What's yours?
So my guest is Keir Finlow Bates. A lot of people will know him maybe as Blockchain Gandalf. He is prolific on LinkedIn and sometimes on other, like I think he's on Twitter and all these kind of things as well. He's just such an interesting and thoughtful guy. I think I actually first saw him on LinkedIn, and similar to your reasoning for Jeff, he's extremely technical. I would say like his expertise are on the technical side. And when you get someone who's that technical and insightful and intelligent, who can also explain things very concisely and in a digestible way like Keir can, I think it's a perfect basically podcast guest. And in this episode, he's talking about blockchain basics. He's talking about smart contracts and how they can be applied to things like gaming, and specifically the importance that blockchain has for things like digital ownership in kind of an open world. And yeah, let me run the clip.
To me, the obvious one has always been the gaming industry, right? I mean, we've gone through this strange evolution of ownership. In the when I was young, I had my record collection on vinyl and then on CD. I had my book collection on paper, and I had movies on DVD or VHS before that, and I owned them. I had a box, and as long as I looked after them, I knew that I had them for the rest of my life. And then we got to the point where it became easy to duplicate CDs and copy MP3s and stuff like that. So we used to own our stuff, and not only that, we could lend it to our friends, and we could give it to our kids, right? Then streaming came along and solved the problem that these media companies had, in that they could, rather than trying to solve things with DRM, which didn't work, they could lease us the movie. So even if you go and buy a movie on Amazon Prime, right, you don't own it the way that you owned it when you bought it on a DVD, because when you die, you don't get to pass it on to your kids, right? Plus, you don't know what I haven't read the 27 pages or whatever that terms and conditions, but I imagine that it actually says there's no guarantee that you will be able to see your movie that you bought at some point in the future, because it's just too big a promise to make, right? And they have the responsibility to make sure the server's running, whereas when they gave you a DVD, the responsibility was yours to make sure it didn't get scratched or lost or burned in a house fire, right? So, and I think that blockchain may allow us to return back to that sort of golden age where you actually bought stuff and then you genuinely owned it, in the sense that it was yours to keep forevermore or pass on to somebody else. And I presume that'll come with extra costs. They'll keep, streaming cheaper than actually buying it, but you'll have a real representation of it in digital form on a blockchain. And then I mentioned gaming, and the reason I mentioned that is because my kids are obsessed with amassing digital assets on Fortnite, on Roblox, on Brawl Stars and things like that. And they think that a Pokemon that they own on Pokemon Go on their phone, they give that the same credence they give a Pokemon card. right?
Mm.
So I'm Gen X. To me, the card is certainly more valuable than the representation on the phone. But they live in a world that they have a different view of the digital that I do. For them, the digital is much more real than it is for me. I imagine if they watch The Matrix, they'll just go, yeah, and right. So they're not going to have the kind of mind-blowing experience I had when I watched it. Once I got over the wanting that phone that went click. So, and I think there you may end up in a situation where they want to own their game assets and know that they really own them. That if the game eventually shuts down, they still have the assets that they obtained. And to me, clearly, the blockchain is the way to do that. Right now, we're not relying on a company continuing to run the servers. Now we have decentralized data storage, decentralized blockchain, and other people ensure that it keeps surviving. So, so that to me has always been the first use case. But the game industry didn't like it, so they did a PR hatchet job on blockchain to start with, and they got the gamers thinking that this was going to be bad for them. How genuinely owning your gaming assets could be bad for you as a gamer, I don't know, but it worked until now. Maybe the tide is starting to shift.
Yeah, it's a really great clip I think you've chosen there. Partly because, as you said, Kia gets to the heart of the value proposition of blockchain so neatly in that clip, right? So it's a challenge I often have, and I'm sure you've had as well, where people ask, why do we really need blockchain? Why do we need this Web3 stuff? And a lot of the time it's easy to reach for the whole, digital gold or digital money, digital cash, like something along the monetary side of things. And sure, for some people that might hold sway, but it's not great. And from a storytelling perspective, it doesn't kind of tug at the heartstrings, where Kia instead there is getting at this wider idea of digital property. And I think that is actually a really interesting line to go down. And it's one that kind of, I think, resonates with a lot more people, right? This idea that, do we really own the things we buy? People who, I have a big library on Apple, right, of films and TV shows that I've bought. And it's interesting when you dig deeper into how much of an actual kind of ownership of those things that confers on you. There's been various stories about people, things being removed from libraries or people not being able to transfer them down to other members of their family and that kind of stuff. So I think, that's a nice way of getting to why we really should care about Web3 for digital assets and property.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. Like, I think we've seen, like you say, that institutional adoption in this year particularly has come for Bitcoin, right? And a lot of people are convinced that this is because the narrative makes sense. It's a simple story. You can sell it very easy to the suits and ties in Wall Street that this is digital gold. And they're like, that makes perfect sense to me. I don't need to understand technology necessarily, but that story makes sense. Where I think Ethereum has actually struggled a lot, and we're not, those price indicators where we just talk about the price of Ethereum and whatnot, but it hasn't been rocketing to the same extent as Bitcoin has, right? And I think a large part of that is because the narrative is a bit more complex to explain. When you're talking about this application settlement layer, what the hell does that mean to, your average Joe on the street? But like you say, that clip there by Kia really goes into it quite well. Like, he explains it in simple terms that it gives ownership a degree of programmability that we don't have right now. And when you're talking about ownership, you're talking about a ledger, you want it to be open, you want it to be transparent, you want anyone to be able to participate in that. And that's really where the power of public ledger comes from. The power of distributed ledger technology comes from Bitcoin and Ethereum particularly.
Yeah, I think the key word there for me is definitely the whole, programmability is good, but I think the transparency is huge. And this episode was talking about smart contracts, right? And I think for me, that's something that I always like most about smart contracts is we know that we can't express everything we need to in smart contracts necessarily, but what is there is transparent. You know exactly how it should work and how it will work, what the rules are of the smart contract, even if it can't cater for every scenario, right? And there's some of the limitations we have with them. I love the fact that you can analyze them. You have smart contract auditors that kind of tell you exactly what this should do, how it should work, and what its weaknesses are. So I think it's nice.
And I think that point you made there about the key characteristic there for you is transparency. That relates to the Bitcoin sell point, right? Whereas the programmability relates more to the Ethereum sell point. Like, it's all well and good having this simple ledger that anyone can access, is immutable and all these kind of things. But to take it to the next level, which is Ethereum has tried to do and is doing, all these many blockchains that are EVM and all this kind of stuff, what they are trying to do versus Bitcoin is to have this level of intelligence that goes a bit further, which I think is quite exciting. And I think will reap the benefits in a couple of years' time when we see all the applications that are coming on kind of going mainstream. But right now, that narrative is still quite hard to sell to the big institutional investors, clearly. But enough on that clip. What is your second clip?
Yeah, well, speaking of kind of narratives that are forming around Web3, I think...
Whoa, what an interlude. Jesus.
Yeah, we've upped our game with the studio and with the lovely segues now. Is the narrative around digital identity, I think, is one that has been growing for a number of years now. When I first heard of it 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was much more of a niche subject. I know that Microsoft are doing something, but it was kind of a very fringe project. And now digital identity is at the forefront of a lot of conversations around things like real world assets that you said, around government identities. We also know of countries that are now starting to issue kind of blockchain based digital identity systems as well. So it's happened a lot in the last few years. And this clip is from Sandy Carter, right? And she's from obviously Unstoppable Domains, which is part of this kind of digital identity ecosystem. So let's take a look at what she had to say about it.
Tokenization just means that the asset is online, on the internet, on blockchain. You might have your driver's license, your birth certificate, your membership in the Chamber of Commerce, your last concert ticket may be digitized so you can hold that as well. And that will give you as a person some phenomenal benefits. I'll just give you 2 real quick. A friend of mine was born in Venezuela. She's living here in the US now. She lost her birth certificate. She's got no family left in Venezuela. And she needs her birth certificate. So she reached out to the hospital. The hospital burned down. So how does she get her birth certificate? Like, what does she do? And so we were chatting and she goes, if I had digitized it, if I had it inside of my domain or my digital identity, then I would always have it. It would always be with me. And then another example, I was down in Brazil and I had an accident and I needed to go to the emergency room. I went to the emergency room. They wanted to operate right away, but they couldn't because they didn't have my medical records. And so then I, in this horrible state, had to call to get hospitals to transfer records down. It took 72 hours to get the information down. Now, imagine if I had all that information with me in my digital identity and I could have just shared it. I could have gone into surgery immediately. These are really valuable use cases for a digital identity and using that domain to represent that for a person and a company, right? Like today, that digital identity, IBM.com, Amazon.com, that is their identity. Having the same thing for individuals, I think, is a very powerful concept.
Well, Sandy is a legend, as anyone who's just seen that clip can probably gather. Would recommend you listen to the full episode because I learned a lot in that. Digital identity is one of my favorite topics. I think it's completely married to blockchain, Web3, everything we do in the digital age, basically. I think when we have this infrastructure layer at the bottom, it's all about data, immutability, the quality of data, guaranteeing that. And then everything above that, you want to attach to an individual. So identity is so important for that. Okay, to that clip, there's 2 things I want to take from it. One is Sandy explains things so well. Just saying like taking an asset is something online. When you think about NFT or tokenization, taking an asset online, she's so good at selling things and making it easy to understand. But the other point, when she's like, okay, her friend lost her birth certificate. Well, people would say, well, okay, well, you just need to store things on your phone. You have them on your phone or you have them physically. But it's not enough, really, because the point is it's permanence. You want to reference it somehow on a ledger. Like if I have a certificate and then the hospital that printed that certificate burns down, there's no way to verify the certificate I have in my possession actually corresponds to, some kind of certificate authority to the hospital in the first instance. So you want to have something that is immutable, that is long lasting, is resilient, will be there in perpetuity. And you need something like a blockchain to reference that certificate I have in my possession actually has been signed off and timestamped at a certain point in time by a certain individual. So yeah, that is such a great use case. It's been very well highlighted and explained by Sandy there.
Yeah, that you pretty much hit the nail on the head for like why I like this clip so much, beyond how good she is explaining things, is that digital permanence aspect, I think, is something that can be overlooked with, when you're talking about blockchains. And so historically, digital stuff you might think of as more vulnerable, like more risky, could be wiped easily, or a hard drive can stop working, than physical records. But I think that's one of the things that Web3 brings us. Blockchains and, specifically for me, proof of work blockchains as well, they are so good compared to the old digital world for permanence of a record. So I think, for me, that's an important point that you highlighted. So we're halfway through our favorite guest picks of the year. So why don't we take a quick break and we'll be back shortly.
Today's episode is sponsored by the VeChain Foundation.
Now, we often talk about how emerging technologies like blockchain have the potential to revolutionize sustainability. And VeChain is at the forefront of this green movement with initiatives like VBetterDAO. Let's take a closer look.
Imagine tracking small actions like recycling at low cost, making them valuable assets. These verified records build a massive collective impact, benefiting people through their own actions. Sound a bit complex, but VeChain made it fun. Explore our apps at vbetter.com.
VeChain's goal is to power a new era of sustainable solutions. So if you've got an app idea or just want to earn rewards for small, sustainable actions every day, go check out vbetterdao.com to find out more. And now, back to the show.
So let's get straight back to it. Alec, what's your second guest clip of the year?
So I'm actually combining two guests into one. We've got Heather Leigh Flannery and Alex Kahana. We've had them both on the podcast previously. We brought them together for an episode all around self-sovereign AI, combining two of my favorite topics, self-sovereign identity and the principles of self-sovereign identity, and obviously AI. Let's take a look at the clip.
But unethical AI is a step backward, is a principle. And we're saying, okay, we live now in a data world, in a digital world, and we live in datafication, so to speak. All our actions are translated into data. And so what about this automatic harvesting and collection of our data all the time? I am talking now to you, and there's someone in the background that is collecting everything and taking it and using it and abusing it and losing it, to your point that we said from the last conversation. That's ethical AI. So what automatically we accept this idea without a conversation, there will be automatic harvesting of all the data that is out there that afterwards will be commoditized. And what then the commoditization of everything is there? We're going to sell everything on the SBT or NFT or non-transferable NFT or whatnot. And so why is that important? It's important because then what is my approach? Do I collect everything and I do maximization of data like OpenAI does? Or, for example, I do minimization of data like Heather does, because she's very concentrated on keeping the respect of human beings and the dignity of human beings. So that's what's important, is that we already are down that road of deciding things without reflecting on the deep issues that are simply just going by.
I'll be transparent that this is work that my organization and our partners are seeking to advance as rapidly as possible. What we're working on is not necessarily systems that would directly prevent or change any use of AI in the enterprise and government space. Now, we think we can influence that to the positive in many ways and intend to. But the one thing that we're certain we can do, and that must happen very quickly, is we must introduce the capability for self-sovereign AI. And to be clear, that is not a different kind of AI technology. That is not what it is. It is instead an operating model, a governance model, an economic and financial structure that allows individual human beings, including when they wish to become collectives as families or communities or affinity groups, that allows individual human beings to interact with technological parity with the endless thousands of AIs that will be seeking to serve and influence them from across the private sector and the public sector. Many of those AIs seeking to influence them may be compromised. They may have intentions that are inconsistent with the aims and goals and interests of individuals. Or perhaps they are nominally aligned, like a Venn diagram. For example, a healthcare provider wants to see their patient well, and the patient wants to be well. So in there is an alignment, but it is a Venn diagram. It is not a perfect alignment. It is an alignment, but not a perfect alignment of interests. Yeah. So self-sovereign AI requires first data sovereignty, and data sovereignty requires identity sovereignty. So when you're talking about bringing that about, that also means you need a system boundary and a compliance boundary placed around individual human beings, such that from a technology perspective, a person looks like an enterprise from an IT perspective. Then this means, now let's say you have this. What we will have are the first self-sovereign digital twins. We will be having conversations with mirror images of ourselves that need to be completely private. Our approach is called the epitome, and I can't even imagine the conversation between Dr. Kahana and his epitome. That is going to be epic. I want to create
to see that.
That was a powerful one. I know it was a long clip, but there's so much packed into it. And I think, I was just making notes as that was going, and I want to just, try and touch on a few of the big points I think that are raised. Because if you're new to the podcast, maybe that's not the episode to start with, even though it's one of the best episodes. I think there's some really high level concepts coming in there that, lots to pass. So some of the things I noted, right, let's talk about Alex first. He was focusing a lot on this idea of the automatic harvesting of data, right? He mentioned that phrase. And I think that's something that has been very much kind of top of everyone's mind regarding ethical AI, right? He was saying ethical AI, how are we accepting this notion of, being ethical if it's, the classic example being ChatGPT and its training, right? I think it was the year where the CTO, or now previous CTO of OpenAI was interviewed. Remember this? Well, she was interviewed and asked live, right? Is this trained on my Facebook data? And you kind of just ignored the question and refused, and it was very awkward, right? And that's been the central kind of worry for a lot of people about this unethical use of AI so far. And that term means lots of other things, but that's one thing I think I'm glad he was framing it in that way. He also mentioned, in terms of how we commoditize AI and also just use the data responsibly in the future. He mentioned this idea of minimization, so minimization of data. I think that's really interesting because for me, that's a very concrete bridge between AI and Web3. Yeah. And, lots of people just go AI, Web3, match made in heaven. But picking out specific reasons why it's a good match is there, right? Because Web3 is where a lot of the privacy preserving tech is. Zero knowledge proofs are all being kind of developed within the realm of Web3. And that's where you get, we've talked about selective disclosure before, how we can use things in a minimalistic sense. Yeah. I think that's at the heart of Web3. So I really like that.
Just jump in on that one. It's so true. I think people often try and force blockchain and zero knowledge proof and all this stuff into AI. But like you say, concrete example, AI, the point is I want data. I want good data. And most people, what's the example we give for most digital? We're combining so many different things here. Yeah. Most people give the digital identity example. Like I go to a club and do I need to show them my entire history or my entire license, passport, whatever it is? No, all they need to know is that I'm above 18. And like you say, it's a perfect example where the thing we care about there really is ownership and data sovereignty. And that is kind of like the fundamental pillar of what a lot of Web3 is and what a lot of kind of blockchain privacy preserving identity systems are about. And it's a great example that they're combining that with what AI needs to do in the future to kind of be successful. And most importantly, probably serve humanity in the best way.
Yeah, I think 100% agree with you. I think it's such an important topic, and I like the way he framed it. And I think this is going to be a key feature. I'm sure when we release our episode next week on the future, that's still going to be part of the theme. So hugely insightful from Alex in that episode. And then to get onto what Heather was talking about, she was very much focused on this idea of self-sovereign AI, right? Which is super interesting topic. And to be honest, this came out 5, 6, 7 months ago. So 7 months ago now. And at the time, a lot of this was kind of, wow, like this is futuristic stuff. I'm not quite getting everything here. I need to listen to this a few times to take in what she's saying. But I actually think my big takeaway is a lot of what she's saying in this clip now makes a lot more sense in the context of the last few months with this boom of AI agents. Right? Yeah. All I see at the minute is people talking about AI agents, right? So AI models imbued with additional functionalities, right? Text to action, this whole thing that people are talking about. So I that's my big takeaway is how much more crystallized this is 6, 7 months later down the line. Right now, this makes perfect sense. And when they were talking about having your own kind of AI doppelganger, right? Your epitome going out there doing things for you, having your traits and stuff. We saw very early signs of that early in the year, but now this is becoming like a very fast reality. So yeah, very, very forward thinking.
It's a tiny bit tangential, but I would recommend anyone who has free time over Christmas to watch this Netflix series called Pantheon. And they talk about this concept of uploaded intelligence. It is so juicy, so great. And the point here is the idea of uploading your intelligence to your personal device and getting all this functionality out of it. And like you say, this is not so far removed from reality right now. And the point that Heather is making here is, would I want to upload all of my personality, my kind of the information on my device, my history, all this very deeply personal stuff to a cloud that's run by OpenAI? Almost certainly not. But the idea that they will train models to a certain standard based on all the information that's out there, and then you will give that model a bit more information, host it on your personal device, is very real. And it's probably going to be something we see in the not too distant future. And I am ready for it. I think I'm really excited for it. But yeah, that's a great one. Shall we come to your next clip?
Yeah, so my third and final clip is from Cynthia Huang. Now, she has, we had a couple of episodes this year about the general concept of Web3 and tourism. And in this one, and I really like the way she describes this new concept of the interconnected trip. So yeah, let's see how she describes it. What exactly do you mean by interconnected trips?
Yeah, so I think that's the ideal that we in the travel industry have been working towards and trying to accomplish. And the interconnected trip, I think, means something slightly different to different people in the industry. The way that I see it is that it basically is like this end-to-end experience that's personalized for you. So regardless of how you start your journey, if you're searching for flights or a hotel or even an experience that you want to book, it doesn't really matter where you're coming in, but it's going to remember, like, no matter where you start, it will have your travel preferences or your booking preferences built into that. So the idea is that you have all of the data for all of your trips that you've booked. So let's say if you travel somewhere by yourself, maybe you have certain preferences when you're a solo traveler versus if you're traveling with your family or a partner or for work, you might have, again, different preferences. And so you almost have like these profiles that you can switch on and off. And when you go to book anything, it's going to remember those preferences and automatically filter and only surface things that are super relevant for you. And I think this is where AI comes in, because AI is really, really good at obviously looking for a lot of data and being able to make those recommendations. And I think where the Web3 aspect comes in is Web3 is amazing at storing a lot of interoperable data. And that's one of the challenges that we've had on delivering in this interconnected trip, is that every company is very siloed, right? That's sort of a feature or bug of Web2. And I think they like to keep it that way, where they have their own data. They're not sharing with anybody else. If they're ever sharing their API, it's permission to access. And so it's basically impossible to deliver on this idea of an interconnected trip, just because every company operates on its own. And so Airbnb is not going to be sharing data with Expedia. Expedia is not going to be sharing data with, Uber. And so you as a consumer can never have that end-to-end trip that's connected with all of your preferences for that very reason. But in Web3, one of the things that we talk about a lot is this idea of interoperable data, where if anybody has data within one ecosystem, now that data can be interoperable. It uses the same data standards, but also, more importantly, you as the consumer can choose who you want to share that data with. So if you were like, hey, I really want this end-to-end experience, you can say, I'm going to share it with Uber, I'm going to share it with Airbnb, I'm going to share it with dTravel, I'm going to share it with Expedia. And then everybody has access to your data to really be able to build that like custom profile, but then you can revoke it at any time.
I like that. I loved having Cynthia on the podcast. She was so enthusiastic. Her kind of story about why she got into the tourism industry generally, to bring people together, the idea of experiencing other people's cultures, I think was really moving. And I think that's there's a real philosophical alignment of what Web3 and blockchain and all these kind of technologies are for. And it's about empowering the individual, peer-to-peer connections, all this kind of stuff. that clip in particular, again, is a perfect merriment of AI plus Web3 plus digital identity. You know, AI obviously for analyzing all the vast amounts of data, creating personal kind of recommendations and preferences. And then when we go to the more blockchain traditional Web3 stuff, the concept of privacy preservation, sovereignty over your data, and then selective disclosure of what you want to send with the travel agency is kind of obvious. The interoperability piece is a bit less obvious. I didn't know there was such a problem with kind of traditional travel agencies, that they were kind of monopolizing the data and not sharing the APIs and exposing things. So that is quite cool. I mean, I think that again aligns with a lot of the concepts of blockchain and Bitcoin, removing these unnecessary intermediaries, these monopolies, and opening that system up in a permissionless way. So yeah, it's kind of so many different topics all combined into like a 2-minute clip. So that's a really great recommendation. She was a great guest.
Yeah, and that's part of why I chose that one. You know, apart from Cynthia being brilliant and a wonderful speaker, it was the topic, right? Tourism. And we also had Sam from Mint Pass on, right? And I'm sure that they're pretty sure they're good buddies as well. But tourism for me was like one of the standout topics of the year in terms of seeing, okay, there are actually so many ways in which Web3 is related to it and has kind of these links to it that I had no idea, right? So it's for me, it's stood out as one of the most promising applications this year. But yeah, so that's all my picks done, right? So Alec, why don't you round us off with your third and final?
We had probably one of our most energetic guests on the show this year. I think you might know who I'm talking about. We had the famous Aragorn Moulendijks, self-proclaimed future historian. I think we kind of worked out what that term meant during the episode. He's also known as Mr. Metaverse. He talks about all things AI, Metaverse, Web3, crazy concepts. He was an epic guest. Like, he was so incredibly enthusiastic. It was hard to find one clip to show from that entire episode. I think there's about 50. And if I could choose him multiple times, I probably would. But here's the clip.
The final invention. I think it's important to stress that I don't necessarily mean that we will not create any new technologies after AI. In fact, I think we're going to create many. But I don't think we will be creating them as being Homo sapiens. I think AI is going to launch us into new level of reality and civilization that we cannot possibly comprehend. And so going forth, humanity will no longer be inventing things in and of ourselves, right? If we look at, for example, penicillin, right? Penicillin was, well, okay, technically it wasn't invented, it was empirically discovered. Maybe this is not the best example. Combustion engine. Let's take the combustion engine. Jean-Joseph Etienne Lenoir was a Belgian man who invented the combustion engine. Great invention. We're using it every day. He didn't put it in a car straight away. That was Carl Benz who invented the car. And then because Carl Benz was told, a horrid contraption, Henry Ford was forced to invent the conveyor belt so that he could mass produce the Model T. That's how that went down. All of these things, all of these men invented things. Of course, they used knowledge that they then got from people that came before them, right? Carl Benz built on the work of Jean-Joseph, and then Henry Ford built on the work of Carl Benz. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, but up until this point, mankind has been the sole creator and inventor of our technology. Right. And in that sense, we invented these things. We created them. We came up with the ways of building them and doing that. That time is already over. Man's best and strongest technology today is no longer created just by man. Right? Up until a few years ago, it was still engineers with a computer, basically some jacked up calculator on steroids. But now the game has changed. Right? The game has changed. Now we're talking to an intelligence other than our own that is informing our decisions and our ideas and our creativity. On every single test we can run at this point, GPT-4o scores higher creativity marks than humans. It's scoring an IQ of 125 to 130 on most standard tests. And I guarantee you that at OpenAI right now, they're not working like, oh, we have this team of humans and we're thinking about the next AI. No, they're using the best version they have of GPT-4o or something else to help them develop the next product. And that AI might not be putting itself together yet. It might not be reproducing its own species in that sense, but it is helping them build. NVIDIA has inside the company, they basically built an AI that holds all the knowledge of the company going back 2-3 decades. So they created basically an AI that represents their company and all its knowledge, and everybody can talk to it. That means that no NVIDIA engineer going forward will ever be the sole inventor of something, because they will always have created it in collaboration with this AI. And that is why AI is the final invention of humanity.
Wow, what a way to close off that clip. I absolutely love it. I think, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Aragorn's enthusiasm, his way of speaking is absolutely infectious. I will also never forget the fact that he took a delivery during this this recording and just walked to the edge of the room, opened the door, didn't break stride, just kept talking. It was amazing. But yeah, that clip is a really, really good pick, I think, because it gets you inside his mind and the way he's thinking. And I think it's a good way to be thinking about these things, right? This idea that we may have reached the end of purely man-made things, right? And now everything is going to be partly co-invented or co-created with AI. I think there's a ring of truth to it, right? I think the fact that everyone is using AI and things already, especially in creative topics or creative media, like we had a recent episode on, the biggest names in the game are doing it, the smallest names in the game and do it. You know, everyone has to do it. We have to use it as well to keep up with content generation, right? So this is just a thing that's here to stay now. And I think that's, you know, it's something we all have to think about, is from a philosophical perspective, what does it mean to create things in a world where we have AI? The other thing I really liked about that clip, right, you know, he reinforces a different version of digital permanence that we were talking about earlier, because his idea when he talks about preserving company knowledge through AI, right, I think is brilliant, because that's something that you have in companies. You have people drift, you have employee churn, you lose that knowledge. Well, AI is now here to be the kind of the best knowledge base that's ever been. So yeah, that's something for me, is something that I hadn't thought about it before, and I came away from the episode just mind blown.
I like that, the company permanence thing, because it's so true. And you get kind of the example we can give for autonomous vehicles is someone has an accident, they're removed from the road, but we as like a potential hive mind don't necessarily learn from that, because that individual is struck and then no one else gains that knowledge. But when an autonomous vehicle, a Tesla of the world, has an accident, obviously that car's not necessarily taken off the road, but the entire fleet will improve because of that. And I think that kind of relates to what you're saying. The other thing that I really like from that clip and from what you're saying here is it's difficult to know what it means for humanity. Like, we kind of thought AI, say 2-3 years ago, when everyone was playing around with ChatGPT, was it's going to do the menial tasks, it's going to do the laborious tasks, the kind of the dumb tasks that traditionally you think of. But more and more, it's diving into the realm of the really high functioning tasks. It's doing the cutting edge research. It's assembling the molecules to create new substances, to create whatever. And I think on the one hand, from a civilization progression standpoint, that's obviously very advantageous. We're going to move at a much faster rate. On the other hand, like you say, you get into philosophy, and we're not going to do it here because we don't have enough time, is what does it mean for humanity? What's our place in it? Are we still pushing the envelope, or are we just pressing the button and saying go?
Does it make us lazy?
Does it make us lazy? Do we end up like the Wall-E kind of people that are in space doing nothing, just pressing buttons and being, you know, pushed around? But yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on the individual, right? And I know for me, I'm definitely outsourcing a lot of the tasks I don't like. And hopefully that means that I have more time for the tasks I do like, but we'll see.
Yeah, the irony of doing our first IRL podcast while saying we're outsourcing everything to AI is very funny. Awesome. So that's our picks, right, of guests. As is tradition, shall we do our favorite clips of each other now?
Yeah, I think, are you going to go first? I'm always a bit worried about the clips you're going to choose, because Jack does most of the editing, so he has all the outcuts and issues and double takes. So
I have all the stuff that he forgets about. So yeah, let's go with you. So I have picked a kind of a quick succession of clips from episode 65, where we did our kind of 101 on quantum physics and quantum in general as it relates to, you know, quantum computing. So yeah, let's take a look.
In early 1900s, where we were at was we knew that atoms existed, and to a degree we knew that electrons existed, but we didn't really know why elements behave differently. We didn't really know too much about electrons, namely because, you know, we didn't have the tools to actually measure them properly, I'd say. So you had this big man named Max Planck. I know he's a bit of a hero of yours, Jack. And he noticed, had some observations around melting steels and melting iron and melting metals, basically. And as you would add temperature, you would get these discolorations, these changes. But unlike most of this classical kind of physics we talk about, where we have this continuum occurring, you would have these discrete steps occurred that he couldn't actually work out as to why. So, I heat my iron. I don't know why I'm heating iron. I'm a forger, blacksmith in the medieval ages or something like this. And it changes color. It changes to yellow, and I keep heating it and it's still yellow. And then there's a discrete jump as I get to a certain threshold of temperature that it goes to orange, and it stays at that threshold for a while. Then eventually it goes to blue. And we basically had these discrete steps, these discrete quantities, and that's kind of where it came about. Like, that's why Max Planck came up with the term quantum, because of these discrete quantities of basically energy being taken by these atoms. It's just crazy the amount of names. Like, we've only been talking for less than a couple of minutes, and the amount of names we're bringing into this. They're like the big names of physics and science, the kind of the names that are household names in many places. But yeah, Max Planck kind of challenged classical physics, introduced the concept of like Planck constant. Anyone who's done any physics at any stage knows about this, and he laid the groundwork for quantum mechanics and basically started the boom of science around subatomic particles. And kind of after that, Jack just name dropped him a bit early there, two camps kind of emerged for the study around subatomic particles that are kind of relevant to this. One was Niels Bohr, and the other was Schrodinger, the famous Schrodinger. And yeah, there were kind of two camps that were opposed in some ways initially. They kind of was a bit of slandering toss between them because they viewed the subatomic world in a different way. But in the end, it kind of, the two ways basically describe the same system, but just from a different viewpoint. I mean, if I was at the time, I would have agreed with Bohr, because that's the only thing that would have made sense to my simple mind, is the idea of having these fixed particles. As soon as we start to get to this like wave-like kind of probabilistic locations, so we don't know exactly where they are, there's like a probability they're going to be somewhere, maybe a probability they're going to be somewhere else. Like, it kind of just blows the mind a little bit. I think a way to simplify this is that the classical deterministic science is very much like outcomes are 2 + 2 always equals 4. And when we start to get to this wave particle duality, where Schrodinger's kind of viewpoint that electrons behaved as waves and they were in probabilistic locations, so there's a 20% chance it could be here, a 40% chance it could be here. Imagine if your maths now changes to 2 + 2 has a 10% chance of equaling 5. All of a sudden, it becomes quite impractical when we think on the big scale, but it's very useful when we start to think on the smaller scale. And, this kind of viewpoint really led to groundbreaking research in how we actually understood subatomic particles. Wow, what a clip. I just realized how quickly I talk. I need to slow down. But also, god damn, we look so tanned there. It's so nice. I really enjoyed that episode. I really enjoyed doing the research for it, because it's such an interesting topic, like very academic. Well, it has been traditionally very academic and is kind of becoming more practical. You're seeing people constantly talk about the impacts of quantum, especially in the crypto world. But why did you choose that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons here. Firstly, you're covering one of my favorite stories in all of science.
So how excited you were when I was talking.
Exactly. The whole, build up to the quantum revolution in physics generally is one of my favorite things. I think I'm pretty sure my personal statement was based on that story when I was 17. But that aside, I think you did such a great job here of explaining that story and the most important parts of what this new model of physics actually meant at the time, because my instinct is to go into the details, and I'm pretty sure we had to kind of have a couple of goes at recording this episode. It was definitely one of our toughest ones because of the subject matter, and I think you just did such a good job here of distilling down, okay, what do people actually care about? And then I would come in and do that. Okay, but if the nerds are in the room want to hear, then here's what I think. But yeah, so I think you just did a really good job of keeping this one on track.
Thanks. I remember the first take of this, and after 20 minutes, I think we both just paused. I'm like, this is too much even for us. But yeah, it was fun. It was very fun to record. I think one of our most popular episodes, actually. Maybe because quantum's a bit of a buzzword, but I think, this was probably one of the most dialed episodes we've done, and probably because it's quite a recent one as well. But thanks, I appreciate that. You ready for yours?
Put me out of misery.
I wonder if you know which one this is going to be.
I have a suspicion.
You have a suspicion. So this is from our episode on zero knowledge proofs, one of your favorite topics. And I can see how excited you are when you're actually doing the explanation of this. Again, this is another one that took multiple cuts famously, and maybe we'll show some of the outtakes afterwards, but here's the clip.
essentially, think you've got two friends, so say me and Alec, and one of us is colorblind. So in this scenario, I'll be the prover and Alec will be the verifier. So Alec is my colorblind friend for this example, the verifier. So let's say I've got two balls. One of them is colored red, one of them is colored green. So I've got two balls.
You should get those checked out.
I've got one red ball, one green ball. And my statement that I want to prove is that these two balls are different colors, because you, Alec, you can't tell that because you're colorblind, right? So to you, the balls look exactly the same. To me, they're different colors. So how do I prove the statement to you that these are actually different colors in practice? What I can do is I can ask you to hold them and put them behind your back. So I'll give you to the two balls, you put them behind your back, and then you can decide to switch them. So again, you're the verifier. You're going to switch or not switch those balls. You're going to show them back to me, and then I'm going to tell you if you've switched them or not. Okay. So because I can see the color difference, I should be able to correctly identify if you switch them or not. And you'll know if you switch them or not because you've done the physical movement of switching them. Okay. That's a very simple kind of challenge response. You challenge me to identify if it's changed, and then I respond to tell you it has or hasn't. Now, I could get this right with probability a half. Okay. So how do we make sure you're convinced by this statement? Is then you would repeat that many, many times. So switching or not switching. And then I'll be able to guess right every single time. And the probability of me doing that just by random chance is vanishingly small if you do many, many of these challenge response back and forth. So at a high level, that's how it works. And you can be convinced, even though you're colorblind, that these are actually different color balls.
Ah,
My old enemy, that clip. We just laughed as we were watching that. I didn't remember we left that much of the blooper in.
I think that's a blooper of a blooper. I don't think we were meant to leave that.
It's a truncated blooper because we released the full clip on social media. We'll leave a link in the comments if you want to see the absolute paroxysms of laughter that we were in after that clip.
Bloopception. It still ended up in there. I don't think either of us realized that took so long to record. The idea of you saying I've got two colored balls.
It's such a shame that it's the canonical example of how to explain zero knowledge, and it just happens to involve two big balls. So yeah, that was a fun one to record. I'm not going to ask why you picked that one. It's just a comedy value.
It actually goes. It's not just comedy value. I think zero knowledge proof is such a tricky thing to explain, especially on a podcast. I think you did it so well. And this is a famous example. It is what most people use, but I still think it's very tricky to get across, and you did. And you were so brave to talk about your balls on air. But it was a good example. I think it really does explain how zero knowledge works at a high level. And this is a deeply technical thing. So I was very impressed, even though I was smirking throughout the entire clip, trying to hold it together. And you, like you said, you disassociated, you managed to just get through it. But it also is one of my all-time favorite moments of life. I think it was so funny. I think we ended up like bloopering out like 20 minutes of us just laughing about this, but we kept some in as well. So yeah, we'll definitely show that blooper again at the end of this because it is really worth a watch.
Okay, well, if everyone wants that as their Christmas present, then they can have it. But yeah, no, thank you. I think you're right. It's funny that our best clips of the year have come from the two most challenging topics, I think, right? It shows that we put a lot of effort into getting these ones right.
We need to push ourselves more often, maybe, and stop talking about AI. AI is too easy.
Exactly.
Back to quantum.
So with that bombshell, I guess that's the end of our first ever episode, IRL. It's the end of another year of Untangling Web3, another calendar year. So yeah, join us next week where we'll be talking about our predictions for 2025. And to everyone at home, I guess, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, and join us next time to untangle a little more of Web3.